There are some names that just echo through history, you know? And the Black Dahlia, that's one of them. For over 75 years, it's haunted Los Angeles. It's a case that became this perfect storm of media chaos, dead-end leads, and some truly chilling evidence, but never, ever an answer. So today, we're going to dig into one of America's most infamous cold cases. But we're not going to focus on the myths. We're going to look at it from the inside, through the eyes of the investigators who tried to piece this whole nightmare together.
So let's go back in time. It's 1947. Los Angeles is just buzzing with post-World War II energy. But on the morning of January 15th, in a quiet, still developing neighborhood, a discovery was made that would just cast this incredible shadow over the entire city. A local mom is out walking with her kid in Limerick Park, and she spots something. At first, she thinks, oh, it's just a discarded mannequin. But it wasn't. It was the body of a young woman, and she'd been posed in this grotesque, very deliberate way. Right away, the crime scene screamed that this was not just some random act of violence. This was something else entirely. All right, so let's start exactly where the investigators did, with the body and the crime scene itself, because the details they found in that vacant lot, well, they were the first and, honestly, the most disturbing pieces of this entire puzzle.
What they found was just horrifying in its precision. I mean, the body wasn't just dumped there. It was staged. It had been surgically cut in half, completely drained of blood, and then washed clean. Her face had been carved into this awful, ghastly smile. This wasn't a crime of passion. No way. This was methodical. It felt like some kind of ritual.
Yeah, and investigators realized almost immediately that they were dealing with someone who had some very specific skills. The way the body was bisected is actually a known procedure, a hemicorporectomy. It's a technique that involves cutting right through the lumbar spine. This suggested the killer might have had some kind of medical or even surgical training. And that one lead sent detectives scrambling to look at doctors, surgeons, even medical students. But then the coroner's report came back, and it revealed this absolutely crucial detail. All of that gruesome mutilation, it happened after she was already dead. The official cause of death was bleeding from the cuts on her face and shock from being beaten on the head. So the killer didn't torture a living person, they tortured her body. And that detail, it completely changed the psychological profile of the kind of person they were looking for. But behind all the gruesome headlines and the police reports, there was a real person. And to even begin to understand the case, police had to understand the victim. So who exactly was Elizabeth Short? Well, Elizabeth's life was transient and often really tough. You can see here, she journeyed from Boston all the way to California. But that journey was marked by family problems and a lot of instability. She had faced some real tragedy, too, like her fiancé dying in a plane crash during the war. She just kind of drifted between jobs and different groups of people, really just a young woman trying to find her way in the world. And this is where we really have to separate the myth from the reality, because her story got twisted almost immediately. The press painted her as this aspiring actress, the Black Dahlia. But the reality, she was a waitress. She had no known acting jobs, no credits, and that famous nickname, it was almost certainly made up by reporters after she died, probably inspired by the popular movie The Blue Dahlia. Okay, so let's get into the investigation itself, because you'll see how right from the jump, this thing was defined by absolute chaos, total misdirection, and some challenges that were, well, they were just unprecedented. So get this, about a week after the body was found, the killer does something incredibly bold. They actually mail a package directly to a newspaper, the Los Angeles Examiner, and inside are Elizabeth's personal items, her birth certificate, photos, and address book. The message was a taunt. It was this direct communication that kicked off this really toxic relationship between the killer, the press, and the police. And the media just went into a frenzy. They printed these sensational and often totally false stories about torture. I mean, in one of the worst examples of journalism you'll ever hear, reporters called Elizabeth's mother. They told her that her daughter had won a beauty contest just to get personal info out of her, and only then did they reveal she'd been murdered. This kind of media circus just compromised the investigation at every single turn. Now, don't get me wrong, the police threw everything they had at this case. They put together a massive task force of 750 investigators. At the time, it was one of the largest in LAPD history. But they were immediately just swamped. The case became so famous that it created this tidal wave of false confessions. Over the years, more than 500 people have actually claimed to be the killer. Can you imagine? It just buried detectives in this mountain of absolute lies. And after all that effort, all those investigators, all those thousands of hours, what was the result? This. Zero. Not one single person was ever arrested for the murder of Elizabeth Short. So the big question is, why?
This pretty much sums it up perfectly. First, you had the media just muddying the waters and creating confusion. Then you had the public wasting thousands of hours of police time with false leads. But critically, the killer was incredibly careful, and the forensics at the time were limited. The killer wiped down the body and her belongings with gasoline, and back in the 1940s, fingerprinting tech just wasn't good enough to get a viable print off a surface that had been cleaned with chemicals. Any potential evidence was just gone.
So with no arrests, the case went cold, but it never, ever went away. It basically cemented itself in American folklore, and it spawned just endless theories and, of course, endless suspects.
Yeah, over the decades, the list of potential killers has just grown and grown. The most famous is probably Dr. George Hodel. He was a surgeon with a really dark past, and he was even caught on a police wiretap saying, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia." Then you've got Leslie Dillon, who had experience working in a mortuary, Walter Bailey, another surgeon who lived just blocks from the crime scene, and Mark Hansen, the nightclub owner whose address book the killer mailed to the press. I mean, every single one of these guys presented a compelling theory, but in every single case, police just could not build a strong enough case to actually make an arrest.
The investigation also had to grapple with this terrifying possibility. What if the Black Dahlia killer was actually a serial murderer? Her case was just one of several unsolved lone woman murders that plagued LA in the 1940s, and it forced police to wonder if they were hunting a predator who had more than one victim. Just take a look at this comparison. Less than a month after Elizabeth's body was found, another woman, Jean French, was also found murdered. Her body was nude, badly beaten, and, most chillingly, had a message scrawled on it in lipstick. Some people even thought the message said BD. The similarities were just so stark that police had to seriously consider they were hunting for the same person. You know, in the end, the Black Dahlia case is really a story about the destruction of truth. The killer didn't just take a life. Their actions, combined with that insane media storm that followed, created a legend so thick with myths and misinformation that finding the actual facts, it's become nearly impossible. And it leaves us with this question that even after all this time, still has no answer.